The Stranded J Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Stranded J Podcast, where we are going to just have a good old-fashioned news run, and we're going to talk about a few specific things as well. We just got done doing our... for the last few weeks, we've been kind of going over Daredevil Born Again as they aired, and that's ended. So we're kind of getting back into the swing of things a little bit more, and I hope you guys enjoy it. When it comes to Daredevil Born Again, I would love to know your thoughts on it. We gave our thoughts over a span of however many episodes, but leave it down in the comments or wherever you can. Let us know where what your thoughts were on that show, because that was like one of the biggest Marvel things that has happened in a while. People were really excited for that, and we were as well. But kind of segueing right into some Marvel news, we're going to talk about some superhero stuff, and then we'll move on from the superhero stuff here shortly. But I wanted to just kind of get all that out of the way first, because there's been a lot that's been going on in the world of superhero movies and television. First off, one thing I wanted to talk about a few weeks back, and I got lost in the sauce, was these trailers for the new Fantastic Four First Steps. This is now the newest movie that will be coming out, because Thunderbolts just came out this week. We'll talk about that shortly. And Fantastic Four has had a couple trailers. People have been very curious as to how this movie is going to go. Because we've had a couple different iterations of the Fantastic Four. We had the early 2000s. I mean, you had the Roger Corman movie that was really just made as a write-off that never got released. But beyond that, we had some early 2000s Fantastic Four movies. We had two of them, the Fantastic Four and Rise of the Silver Surfer. Those are a bit nostalgic for me. I have to admit, like I loved those when I was a kid. I've never been a massive Fantastic Four fan in the comics or in anything else. I always knew who they were. My favorite character was the Thing, easily the Thing. I liked Human Torch as well, but like the Thing, I just there have been times in my life, including recently, where I actually love the Thing more than I like the Hulk. They're very, very different characters, but they're always compared because they're kind of the brutes of the teams. The Thing has always been a little more interesting to me, and also a little bit more compelling, at least just from my perspective. But going into Fantastic Four First Steps, people are a little worried, but also excited. It's kind of coming out in the same time as Superman. And so everyone's really curious, because both of these movies are kind of the revival of their respective franchises. Now, like I said, we're going to talk about Thunderbolts in a minute. But with Fantastic Four, there's been a long run of some movies that have been not so great and have lost their zest, for lack of a better word. They've lost the funk that Marvel has to make everything kind of their own. When Marvel started with their universe, every movie felt very specific to the character with the story they were telling. So when you cross them over, it makes a lot more sense, right? Well, that's kind of been lost over the last few phases. And it all kind of looks the same. When we watched Captain America: Brave New World, that didn't necessarily feel like a Captain America movie. It didn't even feel like a spy thriller movie, kind of like Winter Soldier. It felt like a Marvel movie. And that's kind of what has inhibited it to I think, have a little bit of a better review score and things like that, beyond a lot of other things. But First Steps is the first movie in a while that feels like its own thing. It has its own really specific kind of vibe. This alternate futuristic 1960s, which is a great tone and a great thing to, I think, have for this movie. Kind of like with Captain America, the original Captain America: First Avenger. That was in World War II, 1940s era. It gave those vibes because that's when the character was created. It wasn't until later in the 60s that they brought him back for the Avengers and things like that with their new line and cast of characters. And they're kind of doing that with Fantastic Four, I think. They're kind of giving it the same kind of 1960s. The retro futuristic thing isn't quite what it was in the comics, but it's a very good thing to latch to. I think it's a very unique way to kind of tell their story. And there's going to be a lot of twists. You can just tell through these trailers, between the teaser trailer and then the most recent trailer. This movie is going to tie in to the universe much more than people think. It's going to kind of be the linchpin in my eyes to how we're going to get to the next full-on Avengers movie. And so we're kind of, like the Avengers Doomsday. So we're kind of waiting on this one. to see, is it going to be kind of the revival of Marvel kind of having its teeth back and being able to have a very specific, a movie that tells its own story in its own right and is very good in its own right, but it also can progress the universe. That's what Superman's looking for as well. And they're going to be kind of competing with each other a little bit. At first, I think they had the same release dates, and then they kind of moved to, they've kind of split off a little bit. So you have like a week or two in between. I am just excited from being a comic book fan to have two of these movies that both, I'm excited for both of them. I mean, obviously more for Superman, but I'm really excited for Fantastic Four. And I'm just excited that I get a chance in the summer to go see two big superhero blockbuster movies that are going to be, I think they're going to both be great. I think they're both going to do what they're looking for. So I'm really excited for that. When it comes to casting, I know that they had a lot of casting issues. This movie was delayed quite a bit because they had issues getting the cast they wanted. I mean, we saw Reed Richards in Multiverse of Madness, played by John Krasinski, and he was a variant version. That's kind of the fan casting that everyone was looking for. He's kind of always been in the running for it, but then we've had a lot of other people. I think at one point before he was Doctor Strange, Benedict Cumberbatch was thought to maybe do a Reed Richards. And they've gone through so many different actors, and it's kind of a will they, won't they for a while. And it took forever to kind of find someone. And then they kind of started to get down who they wanted to play, the three, but then with Reed Richards, they still kind of struggled. And they finally got Pedro Pascal. Now, I think out of the cast, I think he is probably the worst cast. I love Pedro Pascal, don't get me wrong. I mean, between Game of Thrones, Mandalorian, Last of Us, everything, you name it. He's been in so much lately, and I think he's a great actor. I think he's super natural. He's fun to watch on screen, but he does feel a little right now like he's getting shoehorned into roles that don't necessarily fit him. And I don't know, like I felt the same way with him in The Last of Us. I don't think he was my first choice for Joel, but he played Joel very well. With this, I think that's going to be a similar thing. I think he'll play Reed Richards perfectly fine, but he's not my first choice. Just because I've seen him in so many things now. I can't, it's hard to associate him with something new. Especially in a franchise. So that's like the one casting, character that was cast that I'm kind of just, I'm still on the fence about, but I am overall excited for the movie. We'll talk about Fantastic Four and we'll review it on the podcast as we get there. So stay tuned. We'll have more discussion about that. But moving on for the sake of kind of just news and things like that, still in the superhero realm, what I was just referencing before, the Thunderbolts. Thunderbolts just released this weekend. I'm recording this right now on Friday the 2nd, and it's just kicking off. I haven't seen it yet, but I do know a lot of people who have. I know some people who got some preview screenings of it. And this is the movie that everyone's saying Marvel's kind of back with. It's the one they've been pushing a lot with their ad campaigns. They've been trying to push it with a different tone. They've been trying to give it a little bit more of like an indie studio vibe with their marketing campaign. And I'm excited for it. It's kind of, these studios are funny. They always kind of ride each other's coattails. So, you have kind of the era of the verses, right? Well, first you have the era of the team up. The era of the team up, you had the Avengers, and then, even Spider-Man, they were trying to do that and get like a whole universe together for Sony with the Andrew Garfield movies. And they were trying to get the Justice League together. And so that was kind of like the big hype machine for a little bit there. And then they kind of move on and they're like, we've done that now. Let's do the versus movie. So let's have, two, instead of having heroes versus villains, let's have two heroes battle each other and see who wins. And it'll get everybody all excited for us. Then you get, the Batman versus Superman. You get the Marvel Civil War storyline. And so that's kind of the trend. Then they're like, let's do this multiverse thing. Like the multiverse, like this is such when I was young, and not much younger, the whole idea of the multiverse in comic books or TV or movies, it was so dorky to people. They were like, oh, this whole like multi-universe thing, like this is so like, it was such a nerd kind of plot. Now it's like the new hotness and they've overdone it, right? Like everything is about the multiverse. There's a new version of this guy. There's a new version of that guy. There is vampire Aquaman and all these things. I don't know why that was my first thought. I don't think that's ever been told, and that actually sounds kind of cool. But you know what I mean. Everything has just had these multiversal stories, and so now it's kind of we're one other trend that I'm getting to that's kind of weird is there was the Suicide Squad characters of kind of the ragtag bunch who are not wanted because they're either kind of anti-heroes or villains that join a team because they don't really have a choice, and it kind of leads them down this path to be kind of to redemption and becoming heroes a little bit. Well, that's been beaten to death over at DC. And I think the Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League video game kind of showed that. People were sick of it. I think James Gunn kind of got it right with his Suicide Squad movie. They did a bunch of animated stuff. Harley Quinn took off. They've had all this stuff. And then Thunderbolts is coming out. And I think the first thought everyone had with Thunderbolts is it's kind of like the Marvel's version of Suicide Squad. And in a way, you can say it is because it's a similar concept. But I think that their approach is so fresh. And I think that's what people were seeing. And I think the question a lot of people had was, is this kind of a course correction when it comes to their advertising? Is this something that is not kind of like the Suicide Squad from 2014 or 15, whenever that was? That movie was going to be way more serious, way less goofy and not have like a bunch of really expensive tracks in their movie. That was going to be just a straight up superhero movie with the Suicide Squad. And then Guardians of the Galaxy came out and everyone was so into that with like their great soundtrack, and it was fitting and the characters were rich and it was just really well made. And DC kind of course corrected not only in their ad campaign, but in the edit of their movie where they tried to add some of that Guardians of the Galaxy like feel to it. And so some people were kind of wondering, is that what Thunderbolts will be? Is it like they were going down the same course as like, say, a Captain America Brave New World, where it's just another kind of Marvel undercooked plot, kind of post-production, kind of chopped it up, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but they're still pushing it out, kind of like what Warner Brothers did with DC for so long? Or is this something that they're truly kind of working on? Well, I don't know the whole behind the scenes of this movie, but I do like the impression I get without seeing it yet, and from the reviews that people are loving it, is I think it might be a little bit of the kind of molding it to be something different after the fact. But I think the majority of it did have a very specific kind of vibe to it, and they really wanted it to be a certain thing. And so I'm really happy to hear that. I'm really glad it's doing really well. I'm excited to see it. I'll probably be seeing it this Sunday, and we'll definitely talk about it in the next episode. But just from my first impressions of it and stuff, I'm just glad that we're getting a Marvel movie that people are excited about. I hear it has a little more heart than we've been looking for. The characters are richer. I do like all of the characters, and I think it was very smart with their choice of characters, because this team is built on probably the strongest characters within like the post Endgame Marvel stories. So you have Black Widow's sister from Black Widow. That movie was a little undercooked. I actually really liked that movie, but it was a little undercooked and not a lot of people liked it, but their favorite part was that character with Florence Pugh. And you had Red Guardian, who was another kind of standout in that with David Harbour. And then you had, something like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and that was a lot of U.S. Agent, I think his name is. I'm sorry, blanking on it right now. I've read a bunch about him, but I can't think of it right now. But he's Wyatt Russell, his character. He's kind of one that was a standout in that story. He was actually more of the better villain in that, when he was kind of more the anti-hero, fallen hero that had a lot to build to. Like, I really liked that character, and I really liked where he turned out, where he by the end of it, he's super broken, and that's kind of the point. And yes, U.S. Agent is his name. And he's super broken, and he doesn't really know where to go from here, and he has nowhere to go but up. You got kind of like your Bucky or your Loki there, and so it was cool to see him back. And everyone that's kind of appeared so far in this movie that they are advertising is a good choice, and for that reason. So I think that they've had this. We'll get a little bit into it here in a minute. Actually, we'll just segue into it now, because I obviously haven't seen Thunderbolts yet. So I don't have much more to say about it, except for I'm excited to see it, and I'm glad it's doing well. And I'm excited to see this cast and these characters back that I've seen in these parts. I think they're the stronger bits of those other stories they've been in. But the other thing that happened, along with Marvel's been kind of really trying to bolster up, and they did an Avengers Doomsday campaign where they announced the cast, which has gotten It's very divisive, I will say. Basically, what they did, if you hadn't seen it, is Marvel had a live stream that was kind of rumored to be happening where they're going to have a huge announcement. It was going to be huge, the stuff they're going to talk about and stuff. And it was very different than what people thought, because we've had these Marvel, like they'll just on a random day have a huge conference, kind of like a Comic-Con or something like that. And they'll just announce all of this stuff that's coming up for their movies, and the next movies they'll have the reveal and stuff. This time it wasn't that. It was just a live stream they did where they started by putting down actors' chairs with the actor's name on the back. And each actor's chair kind of just told you who's going to be in the new Avengers movie, Avengers Doomsday. And it was exciting because there's a lot of actors that are going to be coming back that we're really excited to see. However, the controversial part of it was the live stream. People were like so excited to watch what happens next. The live stream went on for hours because they did like a 20-minute break in between every chair reveal. So you just had this silence, and then you'd hear kind of a theme to one of the characters, and they'd put the chair down with the name, and you'd see who's going to be in it. I see where they were going with that, but a lot of people were pretty upset how they feel like Marvel kind of wasted their time. I did think it was a bit pretentious the way they approached that. I think they could have done the same chair thing and just had, a trailer that was like 3 minutes long and just had it go down the line. But we got a lot of reveals in this live stream. Basically anybody that is still existing in the Marvel universe is going to be in this movie. And that's besides a couple, but we still, but I think it's because they're still waiting to reveal some. So we didn't get Tom Holland, Spider-Man. We didn't get Chris Pratt. There's a few others that just didn't kind of appear that we're not quite sure. I don't think Benedict Cumberbatch showed up in that. And so we're kind of wondering on them. I think that they'll eventually reveal them as well, just if I were a betting man. However, it could also be an Avengers Endgame type thing where, we didn't get all those characters in that movie because they were snapped and they were gone. And so they weren't they weren't a huge forefront. And, you have a couple times where you have a character kind of having their own movie to tell where they've been. So in like Infinity War, Ant-Man didn't show up, but he did show up in Endgame because Ant-Man and the Wasp was kind of the movie for Ant-Man to explain where he was during Infinity War. So, that could happen with some of these characters, but it took forever to go through these chairs. But to get to the kind of the point of what we saw, this very much to me looks like an Avengers versus X-Men movie with Dr. Doom kind of pulling the strings, because we are getting a lot of actors back from the original X-Men movies from the 2000s, which I think is a direct response from Deadpool and Wolverine, where they brought back Hugh Jackman, who also was not announced in these cast of chairs, by the way. But they brought back Hugh Jackman. I think that movie made so much money, they said, oh man, we got to do that again. And so we're getting back Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, James Marsden. We're getting back Rebecca Romaine. We're getting back, we're getting all kinds of characters. We're getting Nightcrawler back. We're getting all of these like X-Men characters, and they're going to be kind of crossing over with, the typical ones you can think of like Anthony Mackie, Captain America, Chris Hemsworth, Thor, Paul Rudd, Ant-Man, Letitia Wright, Black Panther. All these characters we're going to be getting as well, and they're going to all kind of cross over. And then at the very end of this reveal, you had Robert Downey Jr. walk up behind all the chairs, put his chair down, and he is obviously playing Dr. Doom, which was the big reveal of last summer. I'm excited for that movie. I am very concerned on how they're going to fit that many characters into a movie and let it make sense and have it be worth it, right? They did such a good job with Infinity War, and they did such a good job with Endgame. But even in those, there are some people who always go, we didn't get much of this character. We didn't get much of that character. This character got kind of left by the wayside. They had to kind of shoehorn, like in Infinity War, there's a lot of Bruce Banner, but there wasn't a lot of Hulk. You had the Guardians, in one part were really prominent. In the second part, they weren't so prominent. You have all those things. And so, it depends on how you feel about it. But for me, I feel like this will be the first thought is I hope this isn't just a cameo fest. Normally that's something that will happen and they reveal in the movie. So I would guess that's not the case, because they would leave it as a surprise, kind of like Multiverse of Madness. However, I'm just curious to see. I hope it does well. I really hope it's a great movie and everything. But my first concern is just how many characters they're shoving into this movie. And I know there's a lot they're probably not telling us yet, but it's definitely a thought. So that's a big thing that's going on. We're kind of staying tuned. I think the movie just started shooting a day or two ago, so that's exciting. I think they just had actually a screening of Thunderbolts, the cast, and they watched that to kind of get them excited, because I think Thunderbolts is going to give us a lot of insight into where the universe is. The thing people have been wondering is, where is this going? Because we are not seeing any hints of the overarching story yet. And I think we're going to get that in Thunderbolts. So I'm excited to see that as well. Moving on from Marvel, because we've been talking about Marvel for like 7 episodes, if not more. We're going to just kind of talk about some other movie stuff that's going on right now. And then we're going to dip into some other stuff outside of movies, just because I am a jack of all trades and I love multiple different franchises and I love multiple different things. So let's see here. We have, Star Wars is a whole other franchise, also owned by Disney. Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, just had their 20th anniversary re-release in theaters. And I can't believe that movie's 20 years old. And it's doing very well. It's outselling actually a lot of new movies. The funny thing about that movie is it's weird how generations opinions of things change, right? So you had the original Star Wars trilogy, and then, they had a bunch of time, and then they did Star Wars episodes 1, 2, and 3. Those came out when I was a little kid, and I saw them all in theaters, and I was super excited about them, but I actually didn't like them. I kind of hated them. Like basically everybody else. Everybody hated the prequels. Unless you're just a huge Star Wars nerd. Everyone hated the prequels. Everybody liked the original trilogy, and they thought, George Lucas killed their childhood. That was like a huge ongoing thing. And so, people kind of just banished them. I will say out of the 3, episode 3 is the best. Just because you get to see how Anakin becomes Darth Vader, the cool duel at the end of the movie. It kind of ties everything together. It's a little bit darker, I get all that. However, those movies were just like reviled for the longest time. And then we have some time that passes, and then they start doing these prequel trilogies through Disney. Disney buys Lucasfilm, and you get the Star Wars Episode 7, 8, and 9. And the excitement for those movies, I don't think I've ever seen. I mean, even outside of the original, and maybe it's because I was too young for not the original, but the prequel trilogies from the early 2000s. This, for Episode 7, I mean, it became the highest grossing movie of all time domestically for a reason, and it's because I think people wanted to see a course correction. And when you saw that first trailer for Episode 7, and you saw, a little more familiarity with what you love, you see Han Solo, you see Chewbacca, you see, it's not just filmed and shot reverse shot. It's not just filmed in front of a green screen. There's some actual attempts of filmmaking going on, and everyone's really excited. Side note, my opinion of the prequel or sequel trilogies is I actually really like the sequel trilogies. I think that The Last Jedi is the one that is, the one that kind of made everybody hate the sequel trilogy. I think that one's great. I think Episode 7's great. I do agree that Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, is weak. I loved it because I thought it did a lot of things I was waiting to see. And over time, I've watched it again, and I've watched the discussions, and I actually really do not like that movie. That movie is just really, it's as bad as DC movies kind of responding to their audience and their fans and trying to change something that's already been willed to be done, right? They had no plan with those movies. They had J.J. Abrams came in and he did his and the way he wanted to do it. And then he said, I left it open for the next directors to kind of take it where they want to take it. And then you get Rian Johnson with The Last Jedi, and he takes it in a whole other way that I don't think J.J. Abrams expected or anybody. And he was very bold with it. And he's like, well, this is my only shot to do a Star Wars movie, so I'm going to do my Star Wars movie, and I want to make it so that it can end. I want it to end the way I want it to end. I don't need it to tie into something else. And a lot of people hated that. A lot of people like that. It's the most controversial of the Star Wars movies. And so then, they were going to just have a different director each time. And so theoretically you'd have the final director come in and kind of wrap everything up based off of, they can end it how they want to end it, but they got to look at the other 2 movies and kind of take it from there. And Disney didn't like that. And they said, let's bring J.J. Abrams back because he seemed to be more in love with the traditional Star Wars story than everybody else, because he basically just did a remake of A New Hope. And he came in and I don't know if it was J.J. Abrams, or I don't know if it was the studio or a little bit of both, but it just was definitely this is not Rian Johnson directing Star Wars, and we're going to make it that way. And it was too obvious, and it kind of failed a lot of the characters. It shoehorned things in that were not a part of the story, that just made it really disjointed. But anyways, long rant going back. Now we're getting these re-releases of the prequels, and it's just funny because, everybody just hates these sequels now. They hate the sequel trilogy. They hate everything about it. Episode 7 made all that money, and now everyone acts like it was the worst movie they ever saw. Well, obviously it wasn't. I mean, I know a lot of people saw it and probably didn't like it after the fact, but that movie was so innocent in the whole thing. I would still defend episode 7. Episode 8, if you didn't like it, you didn't like it. And then episode 9, I kind of get it. And now this new generation, like the Gen Zers, love the prequel trilogy. They love it. They are like, every time you go on TikTok and you look at a ranking of all the Star Wars movies, Revenge of the Sith is number 1. And I sit there and I roll my eyes sitting on the toilet or whatever it is I'm doing. And I'll roll my eyes and I'll just say, I cannot believe we're living in a world now where everyone thinks episode 3 is the greatest Star Wars movie ever made. It's the best of the prequel trilogy, but I think the prequel trilogy is the worst trilogy out of the trilogy of trilogies. But I'm, they just re-released it for the 20th anniversary, and it's selling like hotcakes, and everyone's really excited for it. So it's making more money back. One thing that I think has helped over time with those prequel movies is the filling in the gaps of that story, right? The whole idea was going to be how did Darth Vader become Darth Vader? Let's start when he's a kid and go all the way to when he becomes Darth Vader. And now we've had things such as the Clone Wars and Ahsoka and Rebels and all of these other stories with Dave Filoni kind of taking the helm. And he's given us a lot more to flesh that story out. And he's very adamant about, I'm not changing that story, but I'm just adding a lot to it to fill in some of those things people wanted to see in the movies or something that maybe wasn't told in the movies. So, Darth Maul, kind of a one-off character in Phantom Menace that gets sliced in half and falls down a big shaft, and that's all you see. He has a huge story in Clone Wars. You see, it fleshes out Anakin, because I think the direction of George Lucas and what he was trying to give Hayden Christensen was kind of not the best direction. And now Hayden Christensen has had 2 decades to prove he can play this role, and and he can play it the way people want it to, because then you had him, as a cartoon in Clone Wars, and he got fleshed out, and he was much more believable as what you expected Anakin to be, because he's good for longer and he is doing good things for longer. So his fall is much harder. And so now Hayden Christensen's come back, and he's kind of getting a redemption, kind of like a Brendan Fraser kind of situation. And I'm happy to see that stuff. Like, that stuff is great. I just will still fight people about episode 3, man. I mean, I like episode 3. It's the best of the prequels, but the prequels, it's just so funny to have 2 generations now where you have, well, it's actually kind of 3, right? Because you have the people who grew up with the original trilogy, and then you have the people who grew up with the prequel trilogy, and then you have the people who grew up with the sequel trilogy. And like, the people who grew up with the original trilogy hated the prequels. The people who grew up with both the prequel and the regular the mid trilogy, they either agree or they disagree with the older fans, where they're like, it isn't the best, but it's kind of nostalgic for me because those are the movies I saw in theaters. That's kind of how I was. I didn't like them. I didn't watch them often, but they had a special place in my heart because of that. And then you have the Gen Z generation, the people who grew up with these sequels, and they don't want nothing to do with their Star Wars. They want the prequels. And so they're all for that. And so it's just kind of interesting to me how that works out. But it's people obviously like them. This 20th anniversary thing's taken off, and, good for that. Good for that to see. What else? Let's get into, we're going to move on from movies a little bit. Because, I I've talked to death about superhero movies. We've talked about Star Wars. There's some other, before I say that for sure, let's take a look here and see kind of where we're at with movie news. Cause I was just looking at it, and I feel like I covered everything I wanted to cover and talk about, because a lot of this stuff I haven't either seen or it's not out yet. We're not quite at summer yet, folks. So once we hit summer, we're going to have a little bit more to talk about with movies, especially when these huge superhero movies come out. But just stay tuned for that. And then I have a couple other things coming up with movies that I think will be fun to talk about as well, outside of any kind of franchise movies. So hang on tight for those. There was one thing though that kind of just like I had kind of a plan for this episode, and then it just completely changed because there's something that has completely blown my mind, and I have to talk about it. First, we're going to talk about one other thing though, because it's going to tie in a little bit. So for anybody living under a rock, the Nintendo Switch 2, going into video games, the Nintendo Switch 2 is coming soon. It's coming out June 5th. And the fiasco that happened to get one of those consoles was legendary as COVID hits while the new consoles for the PS5 and the Xbox Series X come out. We had a huge whirlwind that I will not get into on this podcast of tariffs and delays for the US, and then Canada also being delayed, people trying to pre-order consoles from France when they're living in the US and Italy and all this stuff, ways people can do backdoor deals to get this console. And the console's coming out June 5th. I got a pre-order. I'm really happy about that. And I'm excited to see where that goes, because I think that'll be, I'm thinking about doing a live stream maybe of unboxing it, and we can kind of like talk about it, and maybe we'll do a late night like streaming session of Mario Kart or something. So also stay tuned for that. And that's kind of the reason I wanted to bring it up. But one game I'm hoping will come out for this, for the Switch 2 that it came out of nowhere, and I'm super excited to get started on it. I just started playing like the first, 20 minutes of it just before this podcast, and it changed everything to me about this episode that I just had to talk about. Literally came out of nowhere just as much as the Oblivion remake. That's like the other thing people are talking about, the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, which is like a whole other thing. But there is a game that just released called Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Clair Obscur Expedition 33. And there are some people it's been on their radar, and they've been kind of following it, and that's great. But I had no idea. I mean, I'm kind of out of the video game realm a little bit. I mean, I was a huge video game guy up until, a year or two ago, and I've kind of dumped it a little bit more because it's expensive. It takes up a lot of room. I don't have the time to play them. And so I'm kind of narrowing down my video game consumption. However, I've been seeing this yet again on TikTok, and I've been seeing this all over the place. And this Expedition 33, man. So it's basically a turn-based RPG, like a Final Fantasy, like classic Final Fantasy. Think like Final Fantasy VII, from a studio that is brand new, that came out by Sandfall Interactive. It's their first game, and it's a small team of ex-developers from Ubisoft, which is a massive conglomerate, huge video game publisher that is getting a lot of heat these days because of how penny pinching they are, on top of doing crunch, on top of coming out with unfinished games that are not fun, and they're expensive, and they ask for a lot of money and all this stuff. And these guys came out, and they come out with this Expedition 33. And it is like, I'm not a huge turn-based RPG fan, but I was like, I have to pick this up. One reason I had to pick this up is because one of the main characters of this game is voiced by Charlie Cox, Daredevil, who we've been talking about a lot, right? His first voice acting for a video game he's ever done. Maybe the first time he's done any voice acting at all, besides maybe in the Spider-Man TV show that just came out, the animated one. He did an appearance in that. But I was like, oh, I got to support that. It's a small indie developer. I got to support that. It's cheaper than a lot of video games these days. I got to support that. And it's blowing up, huge, great reviews. I think it sold 1 million copies in 3 days, which is insane for something like that. And it's just something that we have seen a lot in this industry. lately, which is you see all of these huge, really popular video game studios coming out with these games that are just undercooked, underfinished, kind of like Marvel with their movies, and DC back in the day. It's kind of like how they are with their stuff. And people would have been so sick of it. There's a huge, I think there's going to be a huge video game crash here coming soon. I just think that the industry is being abused and they're inflating the prices so egregiously and not putting a lot of effort. A lot of games come out and then they work on them as they're out, and like, no. So we've seen a couple games in the last couple years that are smaller developers that put in a lot of time and effort to make something amazing. And this Expedition 33 seems to be one of them. The first 20 minutes of this game blew my mind with the voice acting, the graphics, the way the story is going, the music, like everything is fantastic about this game that gives you this sense of hopelessness, like an RPG that I've played. Like, it reminds me like kind of like Final Fantasy VII. All these games that you grew up with that are like RPGs like this, they kind of start with this hopeless kind of, you're in this really dystopian kind of world and there's this one hope, right? There's this one hope of making it better, and that's your adventure. And so it doesn't hold your hand, and I'm not even talking about gameplay. Story-wise, it doesn't hold your hand and tell you, this is what this means, and these things are used for this, which then turns into this, and then this character is here to do this to this person. No, it just, you follow it, and you actually kind of start not knowing what's going on at all, and you pick up these pieces slowly but surely as you play. And I am just over the moon about it. I am like so excited to play it. Like I said, I've only been like 20 minutes in. I haven't had any spoilers, so it's going to take me a long time to play it. Let's be honest. I don't have time to like sit and play this game all the time, but like I am excited to go down this route. So if you're a video game fan, I just wanted to give a shout out to Expedition 33. Thank you very much for being something that, you know, is worth your money these days. And I hope it comes out on the Switch too, because I think that would be amazing as well. So that kind of tied in those two things just a little bit. Okay. Last thing we're going to talk about, and we're gonna move on, or we're gonna end the episode. So I kind of talked about it on Facebook, and the reason I'm doing this now, it's much delayed, and I apologize for that, but I want to talk about Quentin Tarantino. Not necessarily the person. I want to talk about his movies. And this is kind of, I know it's kind of out of the blue, like, well, Jay, you're talking about superhero movies, you're talking about Daredevil, you're talking about video games. What about Quentin Tarantino? Well, I just rewatched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood about a week ago, and that's a movie that I didn't see in theaters. I was already a Quentin Tarantino fan. And it's a movie that I hadn't seen in theaters. I saw, you know, when it came out, released on Blu-ray or whatever, and I saw it and I was like, it's all right. Well, I have now watched that movie more than any other Quentin Tarantino movie, and I watch it every time I have enough time to watch it. But I just like, it's the first thing I turn on, and I watch it from beginning to end every single time. And it got me thinking, like, what is it about that movie and about Quentin Tarantino movies that do that to me? Because before I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, my favorite, I will say that's my favorite Quentin Tarantino movie, which is kind of blasphemous for a lot of people, because he's had a lot of classics. You know, you think of Pulp Fiction, Inglourious Basterds, Django Unchained, Kill Bill. And Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the movie for me, I guess. However, before this movie came out, and it's still probably, if like, it's like neck and neck for me, but my second favorite Quentin Tarantino movie is Django Unchained. And I'm just like, there's just something, it's like crack, man, with Quentin Tarantino for me. What makes his movies stand out? And, the only thing I can think of is like the memories I have of when I first saw those movies. So like, honestly, like Django Unchained, I didn't see in theaters. I was a late bloomer to the Quentin Tarantino movie catalog. I didn't start watching Quentin Tarantino until college, freshman year of college. I think I had seen some of Kill Bill when it first came out, and that was about it. And I knew, you know, everyone was talking about Pulp Fiction and all that. And so I remember sitting in my dorm room, and my roommates, I woke up one morning, I'd slept in, and my roommates had a pizza that they ordered, and it was like 8 a.m, and they had a pizza ordered, and they were watching Django Unchained. And I was like, I guess I'll watch this. I worked at the movie theater when this movie came out. I did want to see it, and I never got around to it. I'll sit and watch it with them. And, you know, I probably missed the maybe first 10 minutes, and I was just completely and utterly glued to that movie, obsessively into that movie. I watched it 2 more times that same night. And because I'm one of those people, I have to like keep watching movies over and over again. And like Trisha goes crazy. She's like, I can't believe you can like sit and watch a movie and go, I want to watch it again. I don't know what it is. I just, if I like something, I got to absorb it multiple times. Yeah, so I was so into that movie, and I just loved. You know, it's a running theme in the Quentin Tarantino movies, a little bit, especially his more recent ones, that I kind of picked up on after I'd seen more, which is the fact that he takes dark historical points in human history, and he fantasizes them. And he fantasizes them in not in a disrespectful way, but he kind of does a catharsis for a lot of people where, you know, he takes the story in a direction you wish the real story went. You know, you get that in Inglourious Bastards, you get that in Django, and you get that in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So, you know, after I had seen Django Unchained, that same like weekend, I watched Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2. I watched Pulp Fiction. I watched Inglourious Bastards. And then I, you know, over time I've watched the rest of them. And I think a lot of people talk about Quentin Tarantino like to death. So I'm not going to go into like the details of like his philosophy, what makes him like technically as a director, what leads him to being appealing to a lot of people, his writing, the fact that he has long dialogue scenes, the fact that he has a little bit of random comedy that shows up, things like that. That's all kind of, you know, obvious to a lot of people who are big fans of that and are big cinephiles and things like that. But for me personally, it's so weird how his movies are like comfort movies, because his movies are very serious material. They're very R-rated. But I like, you know, some people, they're like, I'm going to turn on 27 Dresses. That's like my comfort movie. I'm going to turn on Star Wars. That's like my comfort movie. A lot of times a Quentin Tarantino movie is for me, like I get comfort watching Django Unchained. And I think it's just because how in awe I am of the performances, and just, he has a really good, he has a very good vision for his pacing. And I think the way he can pace a movie is exactly every time it's pitch perfect for me. The movies that I have of his that I don't like as much that's typically the issue, you know, that you have with him. I think that's why a lot of people didn't like The Hateful Eight, because I think the pacing was extra Tarantino. For me, that one's kind of in the middle of the pack, but I digress. But Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he does a perfect job of just, I don't know. He just knows how to get the vibe that he's looking for. And in that movie, that vibe of that movie, just the 1960s, it just feels like a warm summer night in the 1960s driving around. He gets good shots of all of the old school landmarks. He gets a good feel for the time and just what it felt like. He has a good way of showing the grandeur that is 1960s Hollywood. And maybe a little bit of it too was living in California for a short amount of time and you know, working in Burbank and being able to like see these landmarks that like I had been to and seeing them back then. And just, it's the part of Hollywood that doesn't exist anymore. You know, Hollywood is not, I mean, everyone knows it's not the same as it used to be. It's not this golden road of success and majesty and ivory towers of just legendary actors that everybody reveres. Like, that's not really a thing anymore in Hollywood, especially like in Hollywood specifically. And to have a movie that like goes back to that and like really makes you feel what everyone talks about when they think of like the magic of Hollywood, that's really cool. On top of it, the performances are great. I think it does a really good job of representing like how effective like 1960s television was, because we now live in an era where we consume our media through so many different avenues, and how powerful just the television was, because it was the one way you could consume those things besides the movie theater. Like he does a good job of having the radio in the background. A lot of times he'll just have you know, commercials from the era playing. He'll have a lot of commercials on the TV playing. And then all of the stuff that he kind of injects of his own with these characters I think that, it just fits right in like a glove, and I have to also say, this is my favorite Brad Pitt movie. This is my favorite performance that Brad Pitt's put on. It is my favorite character he has played, and it is my favorite Brad Pitt thing. And that's, I mean, I love Fight Club. I love, Seven. All these movies that he's been in are great, but he's a great actor. But this is the movie for me that like I want more of that, right? Leo DiCaprio, it's the way that they are able to do this kind of idea that you have two characters that are, one's the stuntman, one's the big Hollywood star that's kind of faltering, and he left his iconic show, so now he's fighting for his place in Hollywood, and just then taking these three people's lives and doing like a day in the life of each of them and showing who that everyone struggles in different ways and everyone has like their own kind of journey as a person. Is very interesting. The only criticism of that movie I have is I don't think any of the Sharon Tate stuff is interesting. And that's like that was kind of the whole selling point, the whole movie. For me personally, I thought Margot Robbie is a little flat in the movie. And I think all of her stuff is the most boring. And that's sad to say because I'm not trying to like trivialize like the whole Sharon Tate thing and how that whole went out in real life. I think I think the idea there is great, but just that's the least interesting plot of the movie. But where it leads, all of what of that story in real life and where it leads to the crescendo of the ending, it nails it just as Inglourious Bastards ends its ending, or just as Django ends its ending, or Pulp Fiction ends its ending. You get just this perfect, like, I remember, like, it's so bad. I sound like such a like crazy person, but like at the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, if you don't know, I won't spoil the whole thing, but I'll tell you kind of, if you know the story of Sharon Tate, and the Charles Manson story and kind of how that all played out, where she was obviously murdered, Roman Polanski's wife, murdered in her home while he was gone by the Manson clan. This movie, like I said, Tarantino likes to subvert those things and kind of come up with a catharsis that shows what people wished would have happened. And you have these two characters with Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio who don't exist. And if they basically, what if they actually were real people? How would this story have been told differently? And it's basically while they're going in, instead of going to Sharon Tate's house, they go to their house and try to murder them. And it ends in this very bloody, gory, R-rated fight while Brad Pitt's character is tripping on acid. And it's like this whole thing. And it sounds so weird when you just talk about it, but when you watch it, it all makes sense, especially when you've gone down the journey that they go down in that movie. And I remember watching that and I just feel like such a crazy person saying this, but like I was just dying laughing because out of all the Quentin Tarantino movies I've seen, I still never knew what to expect in the end. And, if you look at his kind of the themes and what he tries to do, which is what I've just been talking about, you kind of know they're going to make it out and like Sharon Tate's going to survive. But then, you could also just say, well, they could come in and kill these guys and you got to love these characters. And this is why they don't exist because they died or whatever. And so I was on pins and needles at the end of that movie. And when it did end the way it did, I was just like dying laughing because everyone deserved it. Because there's these awful people and like horrible killers and cult that was just horrible. And it all ties into the Sharon Tate stuff, obviously. So like that part of the movie is very, very important. But it's like the linchpin of the movie, but like the actual Sharon Tate, Margot Robbie scenes, I just didn't quite get into. But when you have Brad Pitt's character going to Spawn Movie Ranch and, he was the stunt guy for the show there. So he goes to check on the owner who was a real person. And all this happened, like, and seeing him kind of putting together what's going on, like, that's all really great. All of just like the day in the life of Leonardo DiCaprio's character, shooting for a TV show as a guest, that's a bad guy, and coming to terms with the fact that he's like kind of washing up and, it all ends, the whole movie ends with, all these characters going in a whole different direction, which is great too. And it could totally warrant a sequel, which I've heard is actually kind of in the works, not directed by Quentin Tarantino, but with his blessing, they're looking to do a sequel for it, which, you know, if they do that, it's actually pretty exciting. But I love the ending with Kurt Russell. He was the narrator of the movie, and he also plays one of the directors of one of the I think the Green Hornet when they're like supposed to be doing a guest spot on there. And all I'm saying is if you haven't seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, go check it out, because that movie it has a weird curse on me that I just cannot stop watching it. I just have to I watch it all the time. And I did that with Django Unchained too, but not to this degree. Obviously with Django Unchained, you have Jamie Foxx's character Django, who is a slave, and then he gets freed by the best supporting character ever made, in my opinion. And he goes off to become the fastest gun in the South. And, you know, you have his whole story of, you know, you take a really dark story of slavery and in the 1800s, and it's like, what if one of them becomes like one of the most like crazy bounty hunters that is like super badass and awesome? Like, that is such a cool take. And then you got Inglourious Bastards, you know, you have World War II, and it's like, what if you had this group of guys that they were so badass, and they were like, some of them were Jews, and they fought, you know, they're fighting in the war, and it leads to them killing Hitler. Like, all of that's so great. And so I just, those movies though, I think he just has a good balance also of beyond the pacing of it all. He just has a really good job he does a really good job of knowing when to add levity. So it's not just this poker faced movie all the time. Most of the time it isn't. A lot of times it's like I said, a very serious subject that is peppered in with like just these really well written, funny, ironic kind of moments. You know, in Django Unchained, when you have like the Ku Klux Klan getting ready to, you know, go capture them, and there's like a 5 or 10 minute scene of just like with a guest appearance of Jonah Hill, where they're just like bitching about the bags on their head they can't see out of, and like, and then they just, you know, obviously go to try to do this, and they get their ass handed to them, and it's also hilarious. But like I just love those things, and it's such a fun vibe as I've gotten older to watch. Like, the best way I can put it is catharsis. There's just a really good catharsis with those movies that you just always have. There's this very rewarding aspect of watching those movies. Each scene, you know, he gets criticized, but also a lot of people love his long dialogue scenes where they just sit and have a conversation. It probably doesn't have a lot to do with the overarching plot, but it's this, just, it builds the mood, the tension, everything. And then it always kind of ends in this big moment. You know, you have the dinner scene in Django Unchained. You have the scene with the German officers and the one undercover officer in Inglourious Bastards. And, you know, you have all those moments, and it kind of just builds. And so I love those. I just think it's just a really good thing to put in your movie. And I think it's just a stamp that Tarantino has. So, you know, if I had to rank Quentin Tarantino movies, I don't even know. I would rank like my top. It probably, you know, I say Django Unchained and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood are neck and neck for me. And I would say it's kind of like Daredevil and Spider-Man, where it's like one day I like one more, the other day I like the other one more. But if I had to say right now, I'd probably say Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Django Unchained, Inglourious Bastards. Then it would probably be, honestly, Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2. Then it would probably be Reservoir Dogs. Then it would probably be Pulp Fiction, which is the next thing I was going to get to a little bit, which is I'm like one of the only people that just doesn't love Pulp Fiction. And I'm not saying I dislike that movie. I think that movie is well made, and I see why everybody thought it was so not necessarily revolutionary, but it was such a big deal when it came out, right? I think for a lot of people, nothing's topped it because it's like almost like a Star Wars thing. It's their nostalgia kind of coming in, but also I think you'll get certain people that could go on for 12 days explaining why that's the greatest movie of all time, or why it's the greatest Tarantino movie of all time. For me personally, coming in late to the Tarantino world of movies, I think that one has a lot of the all the best, my favorite things of Tarantino movies it has, but it's in its infancy. And he's still kind of figuring them out and how he really wants them to go in the future for his other movies. And I think his movies, he's one of those directors that only gets better with his stuff in different ways. And I think Pulp Fiction is just a kind of, for me, a prologue to what you'll see in, say, Inglourious Bastards or Django Unchained. I know Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is one that a lot of people would put way lower. Like I said, coming from a kind of late to his movies, that movie, it just has a chokehold on me, man. I every single time I have a free night to myself, I just like, I'll watch it from beginning to end. And I'm definitely an atmospheric watcher, along with video games too, and comic books. Like, I'm all about just the feel of it. You know, I can get away with, you know, if there's some plot holes. I can get away if there's some bad acting or something like that, bad CG, something in that nature. But when if you catch me with your vibe, or just the kind of what you're, just the feel of the movie, and it just feels good when you watch it, I'm gonna watch it a million times. I don't care about any of like the negatives. I'll just continue to watch it. And there's other movies like that in my life that like, it just hits just perfectly for me. I don't know. It's just what I'm looking for in a movie. It puts a certain feeling over me. I think The Godfather is another one for me like that, where I love The Godfather. You know, I could tell you, I could do a whole episode about why The Godfather is so great. And so could other people, and they could tell you for days about all of the inconsistencies, but then also all of like just the ins and outs of that movie. Right. But for The Godfather, for me, I love the feel of that movie. I love the film it's shot on. I love the cinematography, the music, the acting, everything. And so if there's anything that I don't like inside that, I can kind of avoid it. Cause I'm loving this vibe here. Right. And so that's for me with that as well. But I get that with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I get that with Godfather. A couple other movies, honestly, like if you want to go into a whole other realm, like Napoleon Dynamite, like that movie I think is hilarious. A lot of people don't like that movie. For me, I think that movie it catches a vibe for me. It's like just the whole feel that they are trying to give you just makes it all worth it for me. And it just makes it just like it's like a comfort movie. And so, those are just like off the top of my head, random ones, but Tarantino, he more often than not does that for me, like in all of his movies. And that's why it's so funny when you have something like Django Unchained that is so dark, and the source material is so dark, and what the story they're telling, you know, you have hope in it and things, but like it's a dark subject matter, right? It's a comfort movie for me. And it's a lot of details that make that happen, right? I keep saying right. I don't know why. So yeah, I wanted to like kind of go on a little Tarantino rant because I just recently watched it. And I was like, man, I gotta like get it off my chest. Like, why am I always watching this movie? And I still haven't quite figured it out, but I also have in many ways too. So my question for you, and leave them in the comments wherever you're listening to this. What's your favorite Tarantino movie? Do you like, you know, he has a lot of them. Is it Reservoir Dogs, or is it Pulp Fiction, or whichever one? Jackie Brown, like which Tarantino movie is your favorite, and why? Because I'm very curious. I love talking about that with you. So I'd love to hear your feedback as well. But that's going to do it for the Stranded J podcast this time around, guys. I hope you guys stick around. I'm really excited for what's to come next. Stay tuned. Follow us on our YouTube channel. I will be going live too. We went live all the time for the Daredevil Born Again episodes when they aired. And I'm going to start playing some video games. I'm going to start going live and kind of just talking to the audience. I went live recently and went over my pull list for comic books and kind of discussed you know, what I picked up for the week. So I love to interact with you guys. Like, my favorite part of this is being able to talk to you and get your opinions and, like, you know, hear new things and hear new opinions and things like that. So make sure you follow the YouTube, follow us on TikTok at the Stranded J Podcast. We go live there all the time. And just stay tuned for, you know, if you just like to listen to me talk, because I'll have more of those episodes coming out here shortly too. But thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I will see you guys in the next episode.